Hello and welcome to the ISO show. Today's podcast begins with a story. Once upon a time. Oh, only joking. No, but seriously, it is a bit of a story about Blackmores' humble beginnings and how our most popular service began, which is now called the ISO Support Plan. So it all began back in 2003 when my daughter Ella was born. And although I love being a mum, I also love my job as a quality manager in London. So I returned to work on a part-time basis, which helped cover childcare costs, and also it helped to keep my hand in as a quality manager. And at the time, my father-in-law's business needed to update its quality systems and also to comply with ISO 9001. So he asked for a bit of help, and I was happy to assist and do it in my own time. And I found that I thoroughly enjoyed working with an SME for the first time. Because before that, I'd always worked for blue chip organisations and public sector companies. And I think it was quite refreshing working with an SME because it meant that you quite quickly could develop policies and procedures, things like objectives, all those key requirements of an ISO standard, to help improve efficiency and to provide that structure for the day-to-day running of a business. And I found that I enjoyed it so much, it made me think I'd love to work with businesses like that at a future date potentially. Anyway, back as a quality manager in London, I had a team of auditors, and one of the issues being that they already had full-time jobs, which is typically what happens when you've got internal auditors within a company. They'll be doing a job, but they'll be doing internal audits in their own time at work. So sometimes it can be quite challenging getting them to actually do the audits. That's generally because there are lots of other things going on within the company, and it might not be their line manager's priority to allocate them to do something else, such as an internal audit. One of the other issues that many companies faced, and we did as well, is that some of those auditors weren't actually very comfortable about auditing their peers. And as a result of that, they weren't always that objective or impartial, especially if they're auditing their bosses. And so those findings were a bit weak when it came to the internal audit reports. And then another issue was the ongoing cost for the business, because quite often you have a turnover of auditors within a company if you're doing internal auditing. And there's obviously a cost that goes with training them up. And so it seemed like, every year I was going back to the MD looking for a training budget for internal auditors. And finally, when we look at the process owners, quite often they're very busy and don't necessarily have the time to update processes if they've changed within their department. So all of this was kind of playing on the back of my mind, and after my second child, William, was born in 2006, it made me think slightly differently, because what I found was that as a working mum, you optimise your time as much as possible. It's amazing what you can get done in a spare hour, either at home, whether that's loading up the dishwasher, putting on some washing in the washing machine, as well as feeding 2 children. And also at work, if you had an hour, it was amazing how much I can cram into that period of time. So it was at this stage that I had a bit of a eureka moment. And I thought, well, what if internal audits and updates to the management system could be shrink-wrapped and condensed and then potentially outsourced? It would not only save the company time, but also money, because you wouldn't necessarily have the cost of a full-time manager. So after a lot of thought and planning and number crunching to basically demonstrate the facts and the potential benefits of outsourcing quality management, I managed to pluck up the courage to go to my managing director and say to him, I think you should consider outsourcing your quality management. Well, he looked at me, rather perplexed, and replied, That's all well and good, Melanie, but we don't want to lose you. To which I replied, You won't lose me, you'll be my first client. And that was where Blackmores began, really. That was our first client. And at the time we offered a service, Q Care. I came up with the name because we took care of a quality management system, so QCare seemed to fit the bill. But this has now gone on to be our most popular service. So 13 years later, it accounts for over 60% of our business. The remainder is project-based, and that's where we implement ISO standards from scratch or integrate management systems into existing quality systems. However, since working with quality standards, and for me personally that's been about 20 years now, more and more ISO standards have come on board. And that's how Blackmores has evolved, because quite often businesses don't just need a quality management system, they also need controls for information security, environmental management, health and safety, business continuity. There are lots of things that businesses need nowadays to ensure that their business is resilient, it's sustainable, and it's going to be around hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years. So you need to ensure that you've got a good profitability and keep an eye on the bottom line. So it's always advisable, obviously, to look ahead and to ensure that you're operating as efficiently as possible. So over the years, we've actually accumulated knowledge in 22 different ISO standards. So last year we looked at QCare and we thought, actually, it doesn't really do what it says on the tin. It's not just about a quality standard, it's about all different ISO standards. So that's why we rebranded to call it the ISO Support Plan. So whether you've got a newly certified ISO management system and you need a bit of help just making sure that you're on the right track, or you've got an old system, you've got a mature quality system or QHSE system, but it's become unwieldy and bits have been bolted on, then we can help to address those issues and we can provide support as and when you need it. So the types of companies that we work with range from small businesses with less than 20 or 30 employees, right through to multinational organisations on a global scale. And we have an ISO support plan to fit regardless. So we've got 3 different levels and we have got videos on this, but just to explain very briefly, the basic ISO plan is just 4 days. And typically for a small company, that's perfect. A quarterly visit to do internal audits and to provide on-site support during their annual certification body visit. And it means that they have the same monthly payment going out, they can manage the costs, and they've always got their consultant to hand if they have got a question, whether that's by telephone or by email. We're always there to help. And there is also an ISO compliance checklist and handbook to make sure that they do keep on track on a day-to-day basis. The next level up is the Pro ISO support plan. And this is an 8-day support plan, again spread over a year, and this covers internal audits. It also covers things like reviewing and updating your ISO management system. So it could be, if you've got an environmental or health and safety system, that we update your legal register once a year. Or if it's information security, we can help with updating the statement of applicability, which are all your controls for information security. And we can also provide legal compliance audits as well. So we not only help to identify the applicable statutory, regulatory and contractual requirements that your company needs to adhere to and make sure that management are aware of that, but we also do an audit to check that you are compliant with those legal requirements as well. So this is typically for medium-sized organisations or smaller businesses that have got multiple ISO standards and they just need a bit of a helping hand, because quite often business doesn't necessarily need to employ a full-time quality manager and environmental manager and health and safety manager and information security manager, but they just need a bit of help every now and again. So the Pro ISO support plan is for those sorts of companies. And finally, we're left with the Premier ISO support plan. So this is completely bespoke. It's typically for more than 8 days, and it's for those organisations that might have multiple sites, multiple standards, and they just need a bit more support. So it includes everything that I've discussed for the Pro ISO support plan, so internal audits, updating management systems, but it just gives them a bit more support as far as that hand-holding is concerned. And we also provide other freebies as well, like an ISO induction video based on their management system. So that's provided free of charge for our ISO Support Plan Premier clients. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an overview on the most popular service that we have here at Blackmores, the ISO Support Plan, and to explain a little bit about the reasoning behind it and how it all began back in 2006 when Blackmores first began. If you'd like further information on the ISO support plan, we've got videos and downloads on our website on www.blackmoresuk.com, and there'll also be supporting information on this week's blog that goes with the podcast. Thanks very much for listening, and I look forward to catching up with you on the next ISO show.